Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained, and today we'll be diving into the long and complicated history of Wolverine, one of the greatest Marvel characters of all time. Because there are over 500 issues of Wolverine comics, and because he's also featured in thousands of X-Men, Avengers, and S.H.I.E.L.D. comics since his publication history, I'm gonna break this video up into two. In the first half, we'll take a look at his origins, early history, the formation of his abilities, and the introduction of adamantium into his skeleton, leading up to him joining the X-Men. If this video does well, we'll pick up with part 2 in a couple of weeks, going through his later adventures in Japan and him losing his adamantium at the hands of Magneto, who tore it out of his body using his powers, causing Wolverine to go feral. We'll also dive into his role as one of the Horsemen of the Apocalypse, his first encounter with X-23, his death, and then finally his return.
I said knock it off.
She's a child, Logan. In point of fact, she's yours.
How long has it been since you took your meds?
Created by Editor-in-Chief Roy Thomas, writer Len Wein, and art director John Romita, Wolverine made his first appearance in 1974 in the last panel of The Incredible Hulk issue number 180, before having a more significant role in issue number 181, where he was tasked with stopping the Hulk's rampage. At the time, Marvel was expanding its reach across the globe by creating characters and superhero groups that originated in countries like the UK, with characters like Captain Britain being brought into the fold. Wanting to tap into the Canadian market, the writers wrote him as an ambiguous superhuman agent of the Canadian government, sent in to stop a destructive fight between the Hulk and the Wendigo. Written as a gruff loner who had a strong sense of honor and a wild, savage rage that he continually fought to control. Over time, the Wolverine would become one of the most beloved Marvel characters, mostly associated with the X-Men, Team X, and the Avengers. While his abilities and level of strength vary across publications, in line with the degree of artistic license employed by the various comic book writers and artists that contributed to his development, the character was essentially a mutant that possessed incredible regenerative abilities, animalistic senses, enhanced physical abilities, and 3 retractable claws in each hand. This is just a quick synopsis, and if you indulge me, by the end of the video, we'll go through the wide range of abilities he possesses. As his popularity began to grow, writers Chris Claremont, John Byrne, and Frank Miller revised his character with a 4-part eponymous limited series in 1982. This debuted his famous catchphrase, "I'm the best there is at what I do, but what I do isn't very nice." With each new issue of the Wolverine and X-Men titles, more of his backstory would be introduced, revealing the dark and tormented history he'd endured in a life that spanned over 100 years.
No! No, she! No, please!
You can't hide.
No.
You can't hide.
No, she! No!
Wolverine's life would begin in Cold Lake, Alberta, Canada in 1884. Born James Howlett, he was the illegitimate son of Elizabeth Howlett and the family's groundskeeper, Thomas Logan. Unlike his near invulnerable state as an adult, as a boy, James was very frail and prone to bouts of allergy attacks before his mutant abilities kicked in. Largely neglected by his mother, who had not yet recovered from the death of her first son John, James spent most of his early childhood playing with Rose O'Hara, a girl that was brought in from town to be a companion to James, and a boy nicknamed Dog, who was Thomas Logan's son and James's stepbrother. The children were close at first in their youth, but as they reached adolescence, the physical and psychological abuse inflicted upon Dog by Thomas Logan warped his mind, and the boy would go on to kill the family dog, leading to the expulsion of the Logans from the estate. In a drunken stupor and armed with a shotgun, Thomas Logan would invade the estate late at night and attempt to take Elizabeth with him. When her husband John intervened, Thomas shot him in the head, just as James entered the room. This trauma would lead to his mutations beginning to kick in early, with his bone claws extending from the back of his hands. Consumed by unbridled rage, James attacked Thomas with such ferocity that he killed him, not realizing that he was his true father. His mother, already dealing with grief from the loss of her first son, and now contending with the loss of her husband and her lover at the hands of her other son, drove James away before taking her own life. With Dog telling the authorities that it was Rose that killed the Howlett family and that James had killed his father, James and Rose were forced to flee the estate. After receiving some financial assistance from his grandfather, who told them both to run away, the duo made their way to a British Columbia stone quarry, where James assumed the name of Logan to hide his identity. Becoming one of the most respected workers in the mines, he was nicknamed the Wolverine for his unexplainable strength to size ratio and his ferocity at those that committed wrongdoing within his presence. As time passed, Logan's powers grew, and as he became stronger, his healing factor slowly removed the traumatic memories of his childhood, a trend that would continue over time. While both he and Rose did their best to live a peaceful life under the guise of cousins, Dog would reappear into their lives looking for vengeance. Logan ultimately defeated Dog in the ensuing battle, but just as he was about to kill him, Rose fell on his claws and died. Shocked by the loss of the only friend he had, Logan's mind shut down and he decided to abandon civilization and live with a pack of wolves.
Why are you up so early?
Several years after this, Logan would make his way to the Canadian Rockies, where he would meet a young Blackfoot Indian woman named Silver Fox, with whom he fell in love. The two would share a cabin and live happily together for some time, but with all good things in Logan's life, this would come to an end. This time at the hands of Sabretooth, under the control of Romulus, who attacked Silver Fox and left her for dead. Unbeknownst to Logan, Silver Fox possessed an artificial healing factor and age suppressant, and would survive this encounter, with the two characters meeting again several decades later. For those of you who don't know much about the character Romulus, he was basically an ancient mutant with similar powers to Wolverine that had retractable claws at the tip of each finger and had taken an interest in the bloodline of Logan's mother. Throughout the publication history of Wolverine, he would attempt to control the character and the outcome of his life through direct or indirect means, from using proxies to alter and erase Logan's memories to stealing Logan's son. In the years that followed Silver Fox's supposed death, Logan travelled the world and adopted numerous roles, becoming a soldier that fought in many wars, a mercenary, assassin, outlaw, spy, and a samurai. During this time, he would meet Lord Ogun, his master and father figure that would give the aimless warrior guidance. He'd also come across several other Marvel characters and heroes like Natalia Romanoff, whom he trained in martial arts, Bucky Barnes, Nick Fury, and more importantly, Captain America during the Second World War. Because most people didn't know about his mutant powers, Steve Rogers just assumed that Logan was lucky, as he would always come out of battle without a scratch on his body. After the end of the war and under Ogun's advice, Logan sought redemption for his past actions in Jasmine Falls, Japan, where he studied with Bando Saburo to learn how to be a man and leave his warrior nature behind. It's here that he fell in love with a local woman named Itsu Akihiro. The two would eventually marry and conceive a child together, which filled Logan with joy. Still, once again, this would all fall apart when Itsu was murdered by the brainwashed Winter Soldier, under the orders of Romulus. Believing that both his wife and child were dead, Logan met with an immortal swordsmith named Muramasa, who used a piece of Logan's fiery soul to forge a mighty blade he could use to avenge their deaths, which he would claim years later. It's not until many years later that he would discover Romulus had taken a child from Itsu's womb before her death. This boy was then adopted by a Japanese couple that named him Akihiro after his mother, though the boy would later take the name Daken. By 1961, Logan joined the Weapon X project, which had been created to fight the mutant menace. After receiving memory implants via staged scenarios and telepathic manipulation by Aldo Ferro, Wolverine was placed on a Black Ops squad run by the CIA called Team X, along with Sabretooth, Maverick, Kestrel, and Silver Fox, who all had their memories altered and had no recollection of their shared histories. Weapon X also duplicated Wolverine's healing factor and implanted it into many of the Team X members, which slowed their aging process. In 1966, Logan was recruited by Nick Fury to deal with the Sim soldiers in Vietnam, which were super soldiers created from the excavated body of a primordial symbiote in a series of programs attempting to replicate the creation of Captain America. During the conflict, he would be possessed by a symbiote for the first time, which he barely managed to shake off. By 1968, Wolverine was called back to report to a remote facility in Texas, where he was shot with carbonadium bullets in an experiment to determine how he could be dealt with were he to turn on Team X. While the radioactive bullets slowed his healing factor temporarily, this inadvertently enabled him to regain many of his repressed memories of old. Frustrated with the methods employed by the Weapon X project, Wolverine quit Team X and joined Department K, a secret Canadian Defense Ministry branch based in Ottawa. While initially satisfied with his work and his partnership with Neil Landrum, Nick Fury, Richard and Mary Parker, as well as a young Carol Danvers, Wolverine and his team began investigating a secret branch of the ministry that had ties to Weapon X. During their infiltration, Logan and Carol uncovered a dossier titled The Mutant Agenda, written by Dr. Perry Edwards, that featured the names of Logan and many of his friends. After tracking the Doctor down, Edwards explained that he had discovered the existence of genetically superior beings living amongst the human race, which he dubbed mutants. Troubled by the realization that there were others like him, and with his memories beginning to take a toll on his mind, giving him nightmares and visions that led him closer to becoming crazy, Logan started to abuse alcohol, with his self-destructive behavior driving him to accidentally shoot a fellow agent, resulting in his dismissal from Department K. While trying to get on with his life and with no affiliation to any organization, in the mid-1970s, Logan was ambushed, beaten, pumped full of Thorazine and kidnapped by agents working for the Weapon X project. While he was being kept in a containment tank, a group of scientists, including a man known as the Professor, Dr. Abraham Cornelius, and Dr. Carol Hines, began examining his body and devising a way to turn him into a perfect weapon. To this end, Logan's entire skeleton, including his claws, were bonded with the indestructible metal known as adamantium, and he was also subjected to intense brainwashing, which buried his former personality and memories beneath the conditioning programmed by the project. This conditioning aimed to convince him that he was not a man or an individual, but a tool for the program, and now reduced to a near mindless state, Logan was forced by Weapon X to slaughter every inhabitant of a small town as a test. After some time, he managed to break free of the mental restraints and fell into a berserker fury, killing nearly everyone in the facility before escaping. It's important to note that as a result of having his bones and claws laced with adamantium, this precipitated a chemical change in his body, with the adamantium impeding his natural evolution and weakening his healing factor, causing him to heal at a much slower rate than ever before, which is why in the outstanding film Logan, we find out that his claws had been poisoning him.
That doesn't change the fact that something inside you is poisoning you. You've got to check yourself into a hospital. Find out what it is.
I know what it is.
Regenerative healing. Wolverine's body naturally regenerates most, if not all, of his damaged or destroyed tissue and organs at an accelerated rate. This process is automatic, and Wolverine seems to have no control over it. It also doesn't deaden his pain receptors, which is why he's always furious in combat. His healing factor also affords him immunity to poisons, viruses, diseases, and most drugs, which is why it was pretty difficult for him to be intoxicated, regardless of how hard he tried. Decelerated aging. In addition, Wolverine's healing factor provides him with an extended lifespan by slowing the effects of the aging process, hence why he retains the health, appearance, and vitality of a man in his physical prime, even though he was over 100 years old. Fatigue and telepathic resistance. The mutant is partially resistant to fatigue poisons produced from physical activity, which is why he can fight for extended periods of time, and appears to have the same stamina as Captain America. He's also stated that he was resistant to some degrees of telepathic probing, due in part to the psionic shields implanted by Professor X. Retractable bone claws. Wolverine's skeleton includes 6 retractable foot-long bone claws, 3 in each arm that are housed beneath the skin and muscle of his forearms, and would be released through the skin between the knuckles on each hand. The bone claws are naturally sharp and more robust than normal human bone, and even before they were infused with adamantium, they could penetrate most flesh and many natural materials. But after their augmentation, his bones became indestructible, and his claws were capable of piercing any material, relative to its thickness and the force that Wolverine could exert. Hot claws. A new facet of his adamantium claws upon his resurrection was that they could heat up to several thousand degrees in seconds, a trait which is seemingly tied to Wolverine's berserker rage. Superhuman senses. Wolverine's superhuman senses are a combination of a separate mutant ability and his healing factor, since his sense organs atrophied at a much slower rate than normal humans. His most improved senses are his sight, hearing, and smell, but he's also stated that he had an increased sense of taste and touch. With these, he's been noted to see in complete darkness. His hearing is almost as good as Daredevil's. He can track people and objects just by smell alone, and Wolverine can identify the individual ingredients in food and beverages he consumes. In addition to this, his sense of touch is so sensitive that he can feel the incoming beams of Cyclops based on the shift in air pressure that precedes their arrival. The mutant also has superhuman strength, speed, stamina, durability, agility, and reflexes, which, coupled with his years spent training in numerous forms of martial arts and the decades of wars he's been involved in, made him one of the most prodigious fighters in all of Marvel Comics. Though he is one of the strongest members of the X-Men and a veritable tour de force, Wolverine also has a number of weaknesses that have been used to incapacitate him. These include his memory issues caused by his healing factor erasing traumatic events in his life, his adamantium hot claws which severely weaken his healing factor, and sensory overload as his heightened senses could be used to undermine him. He's also admitted that being kept underwater could kill him, given drowning cut off oxygen supply to his head, with his healing factor only prolonging the agony. Wandering the woods in a near feral state after escaping the facility, Logan was discovered by Heather and James Hudson, a young couple honeymooning in the Rockies whom he attacked, only to be shot in the head by James in self-defense. This would surprisingly grow into a great friendship between them, and while he began recovering from his injuries, part of his previous persona began to pop up. After recovering his mental faculties with the help of the Hudsons, Logan voluntarily became a member of Canada's Department H, a superhuman-orientated agency founded by James Hudson that sought the protection of both humans and mutants from dangerous threats. It's here that we come full circle with his first appearance in Marvel Comics, when he's tasked by the department to stop the Incredible Hulk and the Wendigo, who were sparring near a small town. Wolverine would spend the next few months completing espionage missions and tasks for Department H, and was eventually approached by Charles Xavier. Professor X had been looking for mutants to help save his students called the X-Men, who were trapped on an island called Krakoa that had developed sentience, and he manages to convince Wolverine to help them. After resigning from the department and saving the mutants, Wolverine decided to stay with the X-Men at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, where he found comfort in other mutants like himself. Despite being initially skeptical of Xavier's hope for mutant and human coexistence, especially due to the long life of pain and betrayal he'd endured, Wolverine began to respect his ideals, determination, and goals, and grew to be a loyal and trusted member of the X-Men. Well, that's the end of part 1 to this Wolverine History Explained video. If there's enough interest from you guys, we'll pick back up with a look at the second half of his life soon. Thanks again to all of you guys who recommended we explore the origins of Wolverine. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification icon to stay up to date on all my content, and if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film and Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.